This is the presentation for Chapter 7 in the Rothermel textbook on innovation, entrepreneurship, and platforms. This chapter examines change in strategic management through the perspectives of innovation and corporate entrepreneurship. The starting point is to recognize how competitive dynamics impact the performance of business strategies. We do so by discussing the industry life cycle, corporate entrepreneurship, and innovation processes. This presentation does not cover platforms which are sufficiently discussed in the textbook. Throughout this course, we consistently come across some core questions in strategic management. Clear answers to these questions about customer segments, product and service offerings, and markets form the essential foundations for productive business strategies. After clarifying these fundamentals, managers are then ready to operationalize their strategic decisions in the forms of actions and investments. The combination of the focus on particular segments, products, and markets, as well as the actions adopted in pursuit of them, establishes the strategic trajectories of a firm. Once on a certain path, firms benefit from consistency. By repeating what has already made them successful, they become both more effective and more efficient. And this is fine until markets change, and they always change. Change comes from everywhere, including the very broad societal forces described by the PESTEL framework, such as the impact of the COVID pandemic on markets and work environments, all the way to the rollout of new technologies by competitors or requests for new products and services from customers. When the gap between the consistency preferred by a company and the demands of the market become too great, performance will certainly suffer. In fact, change is a predetermined condition just because industries evolve over time. This slide includes a basic but classic depiction of the industry life cycle. The life cycle begins with the creation of a product or service category. Actually, the birth of a new industry is a relatively rare event, even if we are in the midst of one right now with the advent of artificial intelligence as a business category. But once an industry is created, most of them follow a predictable path. First comes a development stage in which companies race to develop a new product or service category. The companies that survive the embryonic stage then move into a growth stage, where the pressures move away from product or service development to scaling the business. The firms that come out of the growth stage then seek to make their operations as efficient as possible in the face of increasing pricing pressure and to establish their businesses through well-known brand names and customer loyalty. If the product category remains relatively stable, it then enters the later stage of maturity and decline. Note that dimensions of demand and time on this graphic do not have scales. This is on purpose. The scale for demand would depend on the industry's size. Some industries like advertising or automobiles are enormous. The total market for other product service categories is far smaller. This slide from the book provides a view to the different scales of time in the industry life cycle. It indicates the number of years that different industries took to reach 50% adoption in the U.S. market. For instance, 84 years passed between the introduction of the automobile and the point at which 50% of Americans owned a car, and 75 years before 50% of Americans took an airplane flight. This means that the time scale for those industry life cycles was really quite slow. But things are speeding up in recent innovations. While it took 70 years for over 50% of Americans to have a landline telephone, it only took 14 years from the development of a cell phone to 50% of people owning one. Some industries rise and then even fail within just a few decades. For instance, the fax machine was developed in the 1970s and became a vital piece of office equipment in the 1980s and 1990s. But really, it's pretty obsolete now, substituted out by email attachments and electronic signature software. From a strategy point of view, two things should stand out about the industry life cycle. First, every business is going to have to change and evolve along with the dynamics of the industry. Activities and investments that would lead to success in one stage would be ineffective in other stages. You would not run a firm in the growth stage the same way as you would run one in the mature stage. Second, firms will do their best to avoid the mature and decline phases, both of which are characterized by poor growth prospects and worsening profitability. This is where corporate entrepreneurship comes in. We mostly think of entrepreneurs as people who start new businesses, but entrepreneurial behaviors take place within existing businesses as well. The results of those entrepreneurial activities generally take two forms. First, firms can purposely seek to develop new business activities in fields in which they already have expertise and believe that there are significant growth opportunities. For example, Google folded itself into a holding company called Alphabet in 2015. It did so to create a corporate structure that would allow new ventures to grow. Alphabet now includes firms that you might not have heard of, such as Waymo, which is developing autonomous driving technologies, and Wing, which is developing drone-based delivery technologies, along with Google and a dozen or so other business units. Much more prevalent are innovations within an existing business. Instead of creating new units, the innovations are melded into current activities. Innovations can vary greatly in terms of type and degree. Some are tweaks, such as when a restaurant adds a new menu item, and some are evolutions, where a company rolls out an upgraded version of an existing product or service. Still, others are transformational, such as when a company launches a significant new product line or enters new markets. Your text points out, though, that entrepreneurial activities within existing businesses are not easy. In addition to the costs of developing new business activities and the relatively high failure rate that accompanies entrepreneurial initiatives of all kinds, a firm's current activities often make it hard for innovations to take root. As mentioned earlier, firms, like people in general, seek consistency. Doing the same things the same way leads to efficiencies and effectiveness, and is simply easier. Innovations have to overcome organizational inertia and restrictive ecosystems, which are fancy terms for the resistance to change, both within the firm and with its partners and systems. To overcome these challenges, firms do their best to be very purposeful about innovation efforts. These include design thinking, Scrum techniques within project management systems, or internal benchmarks for approving and funding new offerings. All of these development techniques seek to facilitate the movement of an idea or a thought that just exists in someone's head into an actual product or system, into something that a firm can profitably deliver to customers at a price they are willing to pay. You know that an innovation has become firmly entrenched once others try to imitate it. Again, innovation is not cheap or easy. Bringing a new product or service to the market requires the investment of time, energy, and money, all of which could be allocated to existing, already successful offerings, or the development of different ideas. And innovation is successful when all three elements of novelty, usefulness, and successful implementation come together. Innovation management can be directed in many different ways. This 2x2 matrix generalizes them. The lowest risk innovation efforts focus on improving existing product and services as offered in current markets. These efforts are low risk because the changes are easier to budget and can be implemented on a clear time schedule, meaning that managers will be able to more precisely predict the return on any investment in those innovations. As firms pursue more impactful innovations, either by moving into new products, services, or markets, or by developing new technologies or business systems, or even trying both at once, the predictability of innovation efforts go down. At the same time, the payoff for breakthroughs will be far higher than for incremental changes. Risk and reward go hand in hand in innovation management. In addition, innovation in any of the types introduced on the last slide is often shaped by the stage of the industry life cycle. Major innovations are part and parcel of the embryonic life stage. As an industry moves through the successive stages, less radical innovations tend to be more prevalent within firms. In the shakeout and mature stages, as growth slows and competition becomes more about price, incremental innovation is often key to maintaining profitability. This is not to say that breakthrough innovations can't occur in established industries. Sometimes new ideas come along that reset an industry's life cycle. In strategic management, this is called disruptive innovation. It happens when there is a discontinuity in an industry's products or services. A great example of disruptive innovation is in the auto industry with the increasing penetration of electric vehicles. Some analysts predict that EVs will account for about 30% of all new cars sold by 2030. Because EVs are substantially different than combustion engine cars, automobile manufacturers have to dramatically change their production activities and supplier networks. They have had to innovate in ways that were not expected just a few years ago. Putting innovation back into the context of business strategies, you can see that it is complicated and multifaceted. Recalling the key questions in business strategies, those that ask about a firm's core activities and investments, dealing with innovation and change becomes a balancing act. On one hand, every marketplace is dynamic in some way, so every firm must manage change regardless of the scale that they pursue it. On the other hand, innovation is often quite difficult and expensive, and necessarily requires that a firm is able to grow and develop while still maintaining its existing business activities. Just coming up with good ideas that can actually be commercialized is quite difficult, and that is just the first step of the innovation process. Taken together, firms are constantly balancing their decisions about sticking with what is already working, as opposed to investing in innovations in the pursuit of long-term sustained competitive performance. The wisdom to maintain that balance is a key strength of successful senior executives. To summarize this presentation, a key lesson is that markets will always change, potentially creating gaps between what a firm offers and what the market demands. Firms can adopt the same entrepreneurial attitudes that inspire new businesses to address these gaps. Innovation is the result of corporate entrepreneurship. Like any startup, the objective of innovation in strategic management is turning good ideas into successful business activities. The challenges are that innovation can be expensive in terms of time and money and is subject to failure. However, if an innovation is highly impactful, it improves a company's future prospects and perhaps can even reset an industry's life cycle. And that concludes this presentation.